Today, more than 8 billion human beings walk this earth. Cities rise toward the sky, and technology connects us across continents. Yet 1 million years ago, the story of humanity was far more fragile. Our ancestors were not countless, but few, scattered groups living in precarious balance with the world around them. Survival was not guaranteed. In fact, there were moments in deep prehistory when the human lineage teetered on the edge of extinction. To understand who we are, we must step back into that distant world. A time when our ancestors lacked the comforts of permanent shelter, when they lived without written language, without agriculture, without the vast knowledge we now take for granted. They were creatures of flesh and bone, vulnerable to predators, to hunger, to the shifts of climate and the passage of seasons. And yet, they endured. 1 million years ago marks an extraordinary period in the human journey. It is a time when Homo erectus thrived across Africa and Asia, when early Homo heidelbergensis began to appear in Europe, and when the seeds of what would become modern humans were just beginning to take shape. These were people both like us and profoundly different. Their lives were defined by adaptation, by fire, by tools, by movement, by cooperation. This is the story of how those ancestors lived, of how they hunted, gathered, and protected one another, of how they braved predators larger and more dangerous than themselves, of how they crossed rivers, plains, and ice to carve out survival in a world far less forgiving than ours. It is ultimately the story of us, for without their endurance we would not be here. So let us travel back. Step away from the cities and lights of our age. Picture instead the crackle of fire beneath a dark sky, the sweep of wind over an open plain, the roar of beasts that no longer walk this earth. Imagine standing in the shoes of our ancestors 1 million years ago. This is their world. This is how they survived. Close your eyes and picture the earth 1 million years ago. At first glance, the continents would look familiar. Africa stretched wide and sunlit, Asia vast and varied, Europe locked in cycles of cold and warmth. The Americas lay untouched by human feet, their forests and plains still the domain of wild creatures. Australia, too, waited in silence, its marsupial giants unaware of the human story still unfolding oceans away. But the climate was harsher than the one we know today. The planet was in the grip of the Pleistocene, an epoch marked by ice ages and brief interludes of warmth. Massive sheets of ice advanced and retreated across the northern hemisphere. Glaciers carved valleys, locked away oceans, and shaped the land into new forms. Winters were longer, colder, and more dangerous. Summers brought brief reprieve but also uncertainty, for food sources shifted with each change in season. In Africa, the cradle of humanity, vast savannas stretched under the burning sun. Herds of antelope, zebras, and elephants, larger than those we know today, roamed the grasslands. Alongside them moved predators of extraordinary power, lions, leopards, and packs of hyenas, each watching for weakness. In Asia, the dense forests of the tropics teemed with life, while further north, woolly mammoths and rhinoceroses braved the snow. In Europe, early humans contended with the ebb and flow of ice, a landscape sometimes lush with forests, and at other times buried beneath frozen silence. The animal kingdom was formidable. The saber-toothed cat with fangs as long as a hand prowled the shadows. Giant short-faced hyenas, heavier and stronger than those alive today, scavenged and killed with equal efficiency. Herds of massive aurochs, wild cattle, ancestors of the cow, thundered across plains, fierce and dangerous to approach. Even the elephants of the time, the straight-tusked and steppe mammoths, were immense creatures, difficult to hunt and deadly when threatened. For humans, this was the setting, a planet both abundant and unforgiving. Food was plentiful in some seasons, scarce in others. The very air they breathed carried challenges: bitterly cold winds in the north, dry heat in the south, and storms that could sweep away entire groups. Yet amid this shifting world, our ancestors learned to adapt. They found ways to endure the biting cold by seeking caves, by huddling together, and by harnessing the power of fire. They navigated landscapes filled with predators, not by strength alone, but by intelligence and cooperation. The Earth 1 million years ago was not a land waiting to be conquered. It was a land that demanded respect. And those who listened to its rhythms, who bent and adapted rather than resisted, were the ones who survived. This was the stage upon which human history was set, a world alive with danger, beauty, and constant change. And into this world stepped our ancestors, fragile in body, yet armed with something far greater: the ability to imagine, to plan, and to endure. If you were to stand face to face with one of our ancestors 1 million years ago, you would see a figure both familiar and strange. Their eyes, deep and alert, would look much like yours. Their hands, strong and dexterous, would be capable of holding tools, grasping branches, or cradling a child. Yet their brow would be heavier, their jaw stronger, their forehead lower than the one you see in a mirror. They were human, but not quite the humans we are today. 1 million years ago, two main branches of our lineage walked the earth: Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis. Homo erectus was the great traveler of the ancient world. Emerging in Africa nearly 2 million years ago, they became the first of our kind to step beyond that continent, reaching into Asia and perhaps even Europe. They were taller and leaner than earlier species, their bodies built for endurance. Unlike the stooped figures of more primitive ancestors, Homo erectus walked fully upright, striding with long legs and narrow hips that allowed them to travel great distances across open landscapes. Their brains were larger than those of their predecessors, averaging nearly 900 cubic centimeters, smaller than ours, yet powerful enough to invent tools, adapt to diverse climates, and master the art of fire. Meanwhile, in Europe and parts of Africa, a slightly different figure was emerging: Homo heidelbergensis. With even larger brains, sometimes approaching the size of modern humans, they are thought to be the common ancestor of both Neanderthals and our own species, Homo sapiens. Their bodies were strong, their skulls robust, their features bold. They lived in colder climates than many Homo erectus, facing ice and snow with determination. Together, these groups represent a turning point in human evolution. They were no longer creatures confined to small niches. They spread into forests, grasslands, and mountains. They learned to hunt larger animals and to endure harsher winters, and they passed on knowledge, however rudimentary, to their young. Life expectancy was short, perhaps only 30 or 40 years, often less. Injury or disease could be fatal, yet their survival was made possible not just by strength of body, but by strength of community. They lived in small groups, 20, perhaps 50 at most, bound together by shared survival. Within those bands, every individual mattered. The old carried knowledge of migration paths and seasons. The young provided energy and flexibility. Mothers, fathers, siblings, and kin all played a part in ensuring that the group endured. These ancestors had no written words, no spoken languages as we know them, but they communicated through gesture, through vocal sounds, and perhaps through the first steps toward structured language. Imagine a group gathered at dusk, pointing toward distant herds, grunting signals that meant food, danger, or come together. In these simple beginnings lay the roots of all language, all story, and all culture. When we think of human survival, it is easy to imagine the lone hunter, the solitary figure against the wilderness. But for Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis, survival was never solitary. It was always communal. Together they built fires, together they hunted, together they watched through the night for predators. They were not merely individuals fighting against the world, but families bound together in fragile, vital unity. As you picture these ancestors, remember this. They were not creatures of the past in the sense of being lesser or incomplete. They were innovators. They were pioneers. They were the ones who carved the path that would eventually lead to you. Their lives, their struggles, their endurance 1 million years ago are written in your very DNA. Imagine the world without fire. Nights would fall heavy and cold, wrapped in darkness so complete that even the stars seemed distant. Predators with eyes attuned to the night, lions, leopards, hyenas, would prowl the edges of camp, unseen but always present. Food would be raw, tough, and sometimes dangerous to eat. Winter winds would cut to the bone, offering no mercy to bodies already weakened by hunger. Now imagine the first flicker of flame. A branch struck by lightning, a tree smoldering after a storm, the embers of a brush fire glowing red against blackened soil. To early humans, fire was at once terrifying and captivating. It danced, it roared, it devoured. Yet within its glow lay the possibility of survival. 1 million years ago, our ancestors began to master this element. The archaeological record suggests that Homo erectus may have been among the first to harness fire, though perhaps they did not yet know how to create it at will. Instead, they may have kept flames alive, carrying smoldering branches from a lightning strike or a natural blaze, feeding it carefully so that it did not die. Over time, skill grew. Sparks from stone, friction from wood, the understanding that dry grass catches more easily than damp, these lessons accumulated across generations. The impact of fire on human survival was immense. First, there was warmth. On cold nights, huddling near the flames meant life instead of death. Groups could move into colder regions, enduring harsher winters, expanding their range beyond the limits of other primates. Fire meant safety. Predators hesitated to approach a glowing campfire, wary of the light and heat. What had once been a night filled with danger became a circle of protection. Then there was food. Before fire, meat was eaten raw, tough to chew, difficult to digest, and sometimes filled with parasites. With fire, food transformed. Flesh became tender, marrow easier to release, roots and tubers softened into edible form. Calories increased, digestion became more efficient, and nutrients were unlocked in new ways. Some scientists believe that this shift, cooking food with fire, provided the extra energy needed for the growth of the human brain. In a very real sense, the flames fed our minds. And beyond warmth, beyond safety, beyond food, fire gave something less tangible but just as important. It gave humans the night. Where once the setting sun meant an end to activity, firelight extended the day. Around the flames, people gathered. They repaired tools, cared for one another, and perhaps in those glowing hours began the first stirrings of story. Imagine children staring into the fire as elders mimed the chase of a hunt, grunted the warning of a lion, or imitated the calls of animals. In these flickering performances lay the seeds of culture, of memory, of imagination. The fire became a center, a heart around which the group revolved. It was not only practical but symbolic. It bound people together, offering light when the world was dark. Even today, in modern societies with electric lights and central heating, we are drawn to flames, to candles, to hearths, to campfires. Perhaps deep within us lies the memory of what fire meant to our ancestors. Survival, safety, and a sense of belonging. It is easy to underestimate how revolutionary fire was. Without it, our species might never have spread into colder lands, never have unlocked the full potential of our brains, never have found the rhythm of evening gatherings that shaped our social lives. Fire was more than a tool. It was a turning point. It was the line between merely surviving and beginning to thrive. As we move forward into this journey through the lives of our ancestors, keep in mind that simple circle of light in the darkness. For without fire, humanity's story would likely have ended long before it reached us. Long before machines, before metals, before even the bow and arrow, there was stone. Hard, unyielding, and abundant, stone became the foundation of human survival. 1 million years ago, it was the edge of a stone tool that stood between life and death. The earliest humans were not the only creatures to use objects. Chimpanzees cracked nuts with rocks, and crows bent twigs into hooks. But our ancestors took this instinct further. They learned not only to use stone, but to shape it. To see in a simple river cobble the possibility of a cutting edge, to imagine a tool where none yet existed. This act, striking one stone against another to produce a sharp flake, was as much an act of imagination as of skill. By 1 million years ago, the Acheulean hand axe was already widespread. If you were to hold one in your hand today, it would feel surprisingly modern. Teardrop-shaped, with edges carefully chipped to a sharp line, it fit naturally in the grip. It was heavy enough to crush bone, sharp enough to slice through hide and muscle. The hand axe was not a crude invention, but a work of craftsmanship, shaped through hundreds of precise strikes, each blow chosen with care. Imagine our ancestors gathered on a riverbank. One squats with a large hammerstone striking against a block of flint. Chips scatter, sharp flakes catching the sun. A second figure picks one up, testing the edge with a thumb, satisfied with its keen sharpness. These flakes, though small, were tools in themselves, blades for cutting plants, scraping hides, or shaping wood. Nothing was wasted. With tools, the human menu expanded. Carcasses abandoned by predators could be stripped more thoroughly, marrow cracked from bones, hides cut for use as coverings. Tools allowed access to resources no other animal could claim. A mammoth might be too large to kill outright, but once it fell from illness, accident, or the strike of another predator, humans could arrive with stone in hand, and within hours transform the remains into meat, fat, bone, and hide. Yet tools were more than practical. They were knowledge, passed from one generation to the next. To shape a hand axe was to learn from the skilled hands of another, to watch, to imitate, and to practice until stone yielded to your will. In this way, technology became tradition. A child born into a group inherited not only the blood of their parents, but the accumulated wisdom of countless toolmakers before them. The Acheulean toolkit spread far and wide, carried by Homo erectus across continents. It was a symbol of adaptability, of foresight. Each hand axe was a portable future, a way to cut, scrape, dig, defend, and survive in lands both familiar and new. But tools also had another effect. They changed the way humans thought. To imagine a tool required planning, a sense of cause and effect. To strike stone against stone with purpose was to glimpse the power of shaping the world. In the sharp edges of flint lay the beginnings of engineering, of design, of human ingenuity. Even today, when we hold a smartphone, type on a keyboard, or wield a surgeon's scalpel, we are echoing that first leap. The Acheulean hand axe, the stone flake, the hammerstone, these were not just tools. They were the foundation of our species' creative mind. They allowed humans to go from mere participants in nature to active shapers of it. When you picture our ancestors 1 million years ago, do not imagine only frightened figures cowering in caves. See instead the spark of intelligence in their eyes as they struck stone upon stone, transforming the raw material of the earth into something new. It was in their hands, chipped, scarred, and persistent, that the first glimmers of invention took shape. And with every strike, the path of humanity edged closer to what we are today. To survive 1 million years ago was to live in constant pursuit of food. Every day was shaped by the need to find nourishment, to fuel the body, to feed the young, to store enough energy to withstand cold nights and lean seasons. There were no granaries, no farms, no certainty of tomorrow's meal. Each mouthful was won from the land, through knowledge, patience, and risk. Our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They relied on the bounty of the natural world, whatever the season and the land could provide. In Africa, wide savannas offered antelope, gazelles, and warthogs, while riverbanks yielded fish, shellfish, and edible plants. In colder Europe, roots, nuts, and tubers might fill the belly when game was scarce. Across Asia, forests held fruits and berries, alongside animals both small and large. Gathering was constant and communal. Women, children, and elders scoured the land for edible plants, digging tubers from the earth with sticks, plucking berries from bushes, cracking nuts with stones. They knew which plants were safe, which roots were poisonous, which seeds would sustain. This knowledge was not written but remembered, a map of food carried in the mind, passed down through gestures, imitation, and shared experience. But gathering alone was rarely enough. Protein and fat, essential for survival, often came from meat. Hunting was difficult and dangerous. Large animals could trample or gore. Predators might turn the tables on their pursuers. Yet humans had advantages: endurance, cooperation, and tools. Some groups may have practiced persistence hunting, chasing an animal across the plains for hours until it collapsed from exhaustion. Others may have relied on ambush, using terrain to corner prey or driving herds toward cliffs or swamps. Still, much of early human meat may have come not from the kill, but from the aftermath, scavenging the remains of a lion's feast, chasing hyenas from a carcass with stones and shouts, or arriving at the site of a natural death. These moments provided rich rewards. With sharp stone tools, humans could slice through hide, strip flesh, and crack bones for marrow, a calorie-rich treasure few other animals could reach. The diet was varied, shaped by the land. Fruits and honey brought bursts of sweetness. Seeds and grasses offered small but steady energy. Insects, often overlooked today, were likely a staple. Crickets, termites, and grubs, rich in protein and easy to collect. Fish and shellfish, where available, provided vital nutrients for brain growth. Even in harsh winters, humans found ways. Dried meat, stored fat, and the inner bark of trees, scraped and chewed for sustenance. Cooking transformed this diet. With fire, food became safer, more digestible, more nourishing. Tough roots softened into edible form. Meat yielded more calories when roasted. Parasites and toxins diminished. Fire allowed humans not only to eat more, but to eat better. Food was not merely fuel, it was social. A large kill fed the group, binding people together in sharing. A mother chewed food to soften it for her child. Elders taught the young which berries stained the tongue safely red, and which carried bitter poison. In every act of feeding lay a bond between generations, between companions, between humans and the land itself. But food was also uncertainty. A failed hunt meant hunger. A season of drought meant desperation. One bad year could thin a group, taking the weak, the sick, the young. Survival meant flexibility, moving when food grew scarce, shifting diets with the seasons, never relying too much on one source. The hunter-gatherer diet was not a luxury, nor was it a hardship to be pitied. It was a rhythm, woven into the lives of our ancestors. They did not see meals as we do, divided neatly into breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They ate when food was found, stored when they could, endured when they must. In this way, humans became the ultimate opportunists. They learned to eat from rivers, from plains, from forests, from coasts. They adapted not only their stomachs but their minds, turning the entire world into a larder, unpredictable, dangerous, yet endlessly varied. 1 million years ago, food was never certain, but through fire, tools, and cooperation, our ancestors managed to nourish their bodies and minds. Each meal, whether a handful of berries or the roasted flesh of a great beast, carried with it the promise of one more day of survival. And in that promise, humanity endured. If survival 1 million years ago depended on food, fire, and tools, it depended just as much on people. No human could survive alone for long in that world of predators, storms, and uncertainty. The key to endurance lay in community, in families bound together by care, trust, and necessity. Picture a small band of early humans, perhaps 20 to 40 individuals, gathered beneath the shelter of a rocky outcrop or clustered around a fire. Within this circle were mothers, fathers, children, and elders, all linked not just by blood but by shared survival. Life was fragile. An injury to a hunter, the loss of a mother, a season of scarcity, any of these could threaten the group. But together they could endure. The structure of these groups was simple yet vital. Adults hunted, gathered, and defended. Children learned by imitation, watching how roots were dug, how tools were made, how fire was tended. Elders, though slower of step, carried memory, knowledge of seasons, migration routes, safe water sources, and dangerous terrain. Their role was not only practical but cultural, for they embodied the history of the group. Care was central. Fossil evidence tells us that even injured or disabled individuals sometimes lived far longer than they could have on their own. This suggests that others fed them, protected them, and tended to them. Such compassion was not trivial. It marked humans apart from many other animals. To care for the weak meant that knowledge, experience, and bonds were preserved, strengthening the group as a whole. Social bonds extended beyond mere survival. Grooming, touch, and shared meals reinforced trust. Around the fire, gestures and vocal calls created a kind of early communication. Though true language had not yet fully developed, proto-languages of grunts, rhythms, and gestures allowed cooperation in hunts, warnings of danger, and the passing of basic knowledge. Imagine a child pointing toward a berry bush, a hunter miming the path of a deer, an elder raising their hand in warning as a shadow moved nearby. These were the beginnings of the human voice. Cooperation was not only functional, it was emotional. The birth of a child brought joy, the loss of a companion brought grief. We know this because evidence of burials, even simple ones, suggests that early humans did not always abandon their dead. Sometimes they were covered with soil or placed carefully in caves. These acts hint at something deeper, the stirrings of ritual, the recognition of loss, and the beginnings of a belief that life was more than flesh. Within these groups, bonds were reinforced by sharing. A successful hunt was not hoarded by the strongest, but divided among all. In turn, when another succeeded, they too would share. This cycle of reciprocity ensured that even in lean times the group could survive. It also built trust, the foundation of cooperation, the seed of society. Hierarchy may have existed, but it was likely fluid. Leadership may have fallen to the most experienced hunter, the most skilled toolmaker, or the one with the keenest memory of routes and seasons. Yet such leadership was not absolute. Authority shifted with circumstances, shaped by ability and need rather than fixed rule. In this way, early human groups were flexible, resilient, and adaptable. But life was not without tension. Competition for mates, disputes over food, or clashes between groups could spark conflict. Violence was not unknown. Yet within the circle of family, bonds were stronger than division. Unity was the shield that allowed humanity to persist where many other creatures fell. So when we imagine our ancestors 1 million years ago, Let us not see them only as hunters on the plains or figures huddled in caves. Let us see them as families, as mothers soothing children, as elders telling stories in gesture and sound, as companions laughing softly in the glow of firelight. Let us remember that survival was not only about what they ate or how they fought, but about how they lived together. In those bonds, in love, care, and cooperation, lay the heart of humanity. Without it, the fragile spark of our species would not have endured. With it, the flame carried forward, passed from generation to generation until it reached us. The world 1 million years ago was not shaped for human comfort. It was shaped by predators, beasts larger, faster, and more powerful than the fragile bodies of early humans. To walk through the savannas of Africa, the forests of Asia, or the plains of Europe was to live surrounded by danger. Every shadow might hide a threat. Every sound in the night might be the last thing you heard. Imagine the evening, just beyond the reach of the firelight. A lion's low rumble echoes across the plain. Hyenas laugh in the distance, their voices carrying in the darkness. The heavy tread of a rhinoceros passes somewhere nearby. For our ancestors, these were not distant curiosities. They were immediate, ever-present dangers. Predators were everywhere. In Africa, lions, leopards, and hyenas roamed in abundance. Cheetahs prowled the open grasslands, while crocodiles lurked in rivers and lakes. In Europe and Asia, saber-toothed cats with their terrifyingly long fangs stalked the forests. Packs of wolves worked in unison, their howls a chilling chorus. Even bears, enormous cave bears in Europe, brown bears in Asia, claimed dominance over caves and valleys. Against such foes, humans were weak. Their teeth were small, their claws non-existent. Their bodies, though agile, lacked the raw power of their enemies. Alone, a human was easy prey. But humans had what no predator possessed: intelligence, endurance, and above all, cooperation. Defense began with vigilance. While some slept, others kept watch. The crackle of fire provided not just warmth but warning, its light casting predators back into the shadows. Stones and sticks became weapons, crude but effective when wielded by many. A single hyena could overpower a human, but a dozen shouting figures, brandishing fire and hurling stones, could drive even lions away. Still, encounters were not without loss. Fossil records tell stories written in tooth marks and shattered bones. Humans were hunted as much as they hunted. Children, the vulnerable, and the isolated were the easiest targets. Every journey to fetch water, every attempt to scavenge meat, carried risk. The price of food could be death, but danger also bred strategy. Humans learned the habits of predators. Where lions made their dens, when wolves hunted, where crocodiles waited in ambush. They avoided some areas and confronted others with numbers and planning. Fire gave them confidence. Tools gave them weapons. Knowledge gave them foresight. Perhaps the greatest defense, however, was endurance. Predators relied on bursts of speed and power. Humans, though weaker, could run further, longer, and hotter. Over time, persistence hunts blurred the line between prey and predator. By chasing animals until they collapsed, humans became hunters of creatures that once hunted them. In this way, danger was transformed into opportunity. But not all threats came from animals. The natural world itself posed constant risks. Sudden storms could flood rivers. Harsh winters could starve entire groups. Falling from cliffs or into ravines could mean death, as there were no hospitals, no medicine beyond herbs and care. Even a small wound infected could end a life. And beyond nature, there was humanity itself. Other groups of humans, equally desperate, could pose danger. Competition for food, water, or shelter might erupt into violence. A clash over a scavenged carcass could mean injury or death. Though humans relied on cooperation within groups, between groups there was often rivalry, suspicion, and conflict. Facing predators and dangers shaped more than survival, it shaped psychology. The need for vigilance, the reliance on cooperation, the development of tools and fire, all arose from living in a world that could kill without warning. Even today, echoes remain. Our instinctive fear of the dark, of sudden movements, of predatory eyes, may be memories carried in our very biology, reminders of a time when the night belonged to other beasts. For 1 million years ago, every day was a negotiation with danger. And yet, our ancestors endured. They did not conquer predators outright, nor did they escape danger entirely. Instead, they learned to live with it, to adapt, to resist, and to survive. In the face of fang and claw, storm and shadow, they found ways to persist, and in doing so, they carved the path that led to us. 1 million years ago, humans were wanderers. They had no permanent villages, no fields to tend, no herds to manage. Their homes were the landscapes themselves, the plains, the forests, the mountains, the caves, and the coasts. Survival required movement. To remain in one place too long was to exhaust its resources, to strip its plants, scare away its animals, and face hunger. And so, our ancestors walked. Migration was not aimless wandering. It was guided by memory, by instinct, and by observation. Elders recalled where herds moved with the seasons. Hunters followed tracks pressed into mud and sand. Gatherers knew where roots could be dug after rain or where fruits ripened in summer. Rivers and coastlines provided constant pathways, offering both water and food, leading humans ever onward. The distances they traveled were vast. Homo erectus, already by this time, had spread from Africa into Asia, reaching as far as Indonesia and northern China. Fossil remains suggest they crossed deserts, forests, and mountains, enduring climates ranging from tropical heat to freezing cold. Homo heidelbergensis, appearing in Europe and Africa, adapted to the cold edges of advancing glaciers. These movements were not migrations of a few miles, but of thousands, journeys spanning lifetimes, generations, and continents. Imagine a group on the move. Children carried on hips, bundles of tools and hides slung across shoulders, fire maintained in smoldering sticks or embers wrapped in bark and ash. They walked along river valleys, through tall grasses, or across rocky plains. Some days the path was rich, filled with berries and game. Other days it was barren, demanding endurance, patience, and hope. Movement was also a strategy of survival. When predators grew too bold, when food grew too scarce, when water dried to dust, the answer was to move. The landscape was not static but a shifting web of opportunities and dangers. To survive, humans had to follow its rhythms. Migration also shaped the body. Humans became walkers and runners. Our ancestors evolved long legs, springy tendons, and the ability to sweat, traits that allowed them to travel farther and longer than almost any other animal. While predators were built for bursts of speed, humans were built for distance. Day after day, step after step, they crossed lands that others could not. As groups moved, they encountered new challenges and new horizons. In colder regions, they needed hides to protect against frost. In wetter climates, they adapted to jungles and rivers. Each new environment demanded innovation, whether in tools, shelter, or strategy. Those who failed to adapt vanished. Those who succeeded carried their knowledge forward. Movement also brought humans into contact with one another. Sometimes these meetings were peaceful, groups exchanging knowledge, mates, or resources. Other times they were tense or violent, driven by competition for food or territory. These encounters shaped the course of human diversity, spreading ideas, genes, and traditions across the ancient world. And yet migration was not only necessity, it was curiosity. To follow the horizon, to step into the unknown, was to open the possibility of something better. richer hunting grounds, safer shelters, more abundant water. That same restlessness, that drive to see what lies beyond, echoes even now in our exploration of oceans, skies, and space. The instinct to move, to seek, is one of humanity's oldest traits. 1 million years ago, humans were already pioneers. They crossed rivers without bridges, mountains without paths, deserts without maps. They carried nothing but what they could hold and what they could remember. And still, they pressed onward. Every step they took reshaped the future. With each migration, they expanded the human story into Asia, into Europe, across landscapes that would one day host cities, nations, and civilizations. The footprints of those journeys may have been washed away by rain, buried by dust, or swallowed by rivers. But their legacy remains, for it was movement, the willingness to walk into uncertainty that carried humanity from fragile beginnings to global presence. The story of humanity 1 million years ago cannot be told without the story of climate. For our ancestors, weather was not a mild inconvenience. It was a force that dictated life and death. To survive meant to endure the cycles of ice and warmth, of drought and flood, of shifting winds and seasons that could change without warning. The Earth at this time was deep within the Pleistocene epoch, a period defined by the great ice ages. Vast glaciers advanced and retreated across the northern hemisphere in slow, rhythmic cycles. Sheets of ice stretched for hundreds of miles, burying landscapes beneath crushing weight. In their advance, they carved valleys, shifted rivers, and reshaped the Earth itself. When they retreated, they left behind open plains, cold rivers, and fresh new lands, harsh, yet filled with opportunity. For humans, these changes were relentless. A valley lush with grass 1 century might be a barren tundra the next. Herds of animals shifted their ranges, moving away from ice or following the growth of new vegetation. Rivers dried into cracked earth, or swelled into torrents that cut off entire regions. In Africa, the birthplace of humanity, the climate wavered between wet and dry. Seasons of abundant rain transformed savannas into green landscapes teeming with life. But drought could turn them to dust, scattering herds and leaving humans to scour the land for roots and scraps. In Europe, bitter winters descended, with snow burying the land and ice sealing lakes. Summers brought relief, but only for a short time. In Asia, monsoons could bring torrents of rain, followed by stretches of crushing heat. To survive, our ancestors had to adapt not once, but constantly. They moved when water dried up, shifted their diets when plants withered, and sought new shelters when old ones grew inhospitable. Fire, hides, and tools helped, but adaptation was as much about knowledge as about invention. Elders remembered when rains would return, or where water could be found beneath cracked soil. Bands that forgot or failed to adapt simply disappeared. Cold was perhaps the greatest enemy. Human bodies, even wrapped in hides, were vulnerable to frost. Without constant fire, death came quickly. In caves, groups huddled together for warmth, sharing body heat as much as flames. Nights stretched long in the cold seasons, and every ember mattered. The memory of where to find dry wood, or how to carry a coal from one camp to another, was precious knowledge. But heat brought its own trials. Droughts stripped the land bare, forcing humans to walk further to endure thirst, to risk conflict with other groups at scarce waterholes. Hunger haunted every dry season. Meat grew scarce when herds moved away, plants withered in the sun, and rivers shrank into mud. Survival meant flexibility, digging for tubers deep underground, gathering insects, or cracking bones for the last drops of marrow. Climate also shaped the very course of evolution. Some scientists believe that the cycles of change, from wet to dry, from warm to cold, pressured humans to become more adaptable. Those who could not adjust to sudden shifts perished, while those with intelligence, cooperation, and endurance survived. In this way, the harshness of climate may have sharpened the human mind itself. At times, the human population shrank to frighteningly small numbers. Genetic evidence suggests that humanity passed through bottlenecks moments when only a few thousand individuals remained alive across the entire planet. Imagine that, the whole of humanity reduced to the size of a single village. In those moments, extinction loomed close. And yet, through resilience, cooperation, and adaptation, our ancestors endured. The struggle against climate was never-ending. It demanded constant vigilance, constant movement, constant change. Humans were not masters of their world. They were its students, shaped by the lessons of ice, drought, storm, and sun. And in that crucible of climate, humanity became what it is: flexible, inventive, restless, and enduring. The storms and ice ages of 1 million years ago were not only trials, they were teachers. They forged resilience into our bones and adaptability into our minds. And through those lessons, the fragile spark of humanity continued to burn. Beyond fire, beyond tools, beyond the daily struggle for food and safety, there was something else stirring in the minds of humans 1 million years ago: imagination. Though they had no written words, no painted caves, no carved figurines yet, the seeds of belief and wonder were already present. For to live in such a dangerous, unpredictable world was also to question it, to sense meaning in storms, to feel awe at fire, to fear the shadows beyond the trees. Around the firelight, as night pressed close, early humans must have felt the mystery of existence. The crack of thunder, the flicker of lightning, the roar of predators in the dark, all were forces beyond their control. To survive among such powers, they needed more than muscle and stone. They needed to imagine. We cannot know precisely what they believed, but clues exist. Fossil evidence suggests that even before the age of modern humans, some groups cared for their dead. Skeletons have been found placed carefully in caves, sometimes with signs that earth had been piled over them. This was not simply abandonment. It was an act, deliberate, thoughtful, suggesting that death was more than disappearance. Perhaps they feared the spirits of the dead, or perhaps they honored them, keeping memory alive. Care extended to the living, too. Some fossils show signs of severe injury or illness, broken bones that had healed, teeth lost long before death. These individuals survived not because they could fend for themselves, but because others fed and protected them. Compassion, born of imagination, shaped survival. For to care is also to believe in value beyond the moment, to see life not only as breath and muscle, but as part of something larger. Ritual may have been simple, but its beginnings were profound. Perhaps a circle around the fire became more than warmth. It became a place of meaning, a symbol of safety and belonging. Gestures and chants may have carried echoes of early ceremony. A hand raised to the sky at a storm's arrival, a hum to soothe a frightened child, a shared rhythm tapped on stone, all were beginnings of culture. And in imagination lay the roots of storytelling. Though no language as we know it yet existed, sounds and gestures could weave meaning. Imagine a hunter miming the chase of an antelope, showing how it darted and fell. Children would watch, laugh, and learn. A warning grunt could be shaped into rhythm, becoming the first steps of song. Even laughter itself, a universal sound among humans, bound groups together, easing fear, cementing trust. Belief may also have been tied to the natural world. Fire was not just useful, it was alive, unpredictable, hungry. Rivers flowed endlessly, the sun returned each morning, the moon grew and shrank in the sky. To live in such a world was to be surrounded by patterns too vast to ignore. And so, perhaps, early humans began to see meaning in cycles, to imagine forces behind them. These were not yet gods or spirits as we know them, but the beginnings of something greater, the sense that the world was alive, full of powers beyond sight. Imagination did more than comfort. It prepared the mind for possibility. To envision what was not present, to imagine an absent herd, a dangerous predator, a coming storm was to think ahead, to plan. Belief and survival were not separate, they were entwined. The mind that could imagine a spirit in the dark could also imagine the hunt of tomorrow, the shelter yet to be built, the journey yet to be taken. So when we think of humans 1 million years ago, let us not see them only as pragmatic survivors. Let us see them as dreamers, two creatures whose minds reached beyond the immediate, who sensed mysteries in the firelight and meaning in the sky. Their beliefs may have been simple, their rituals unrecorded, but in their imagination lay the first steps toward story, art, and faith. For it is imagination that makes us human, the ability to see what is not yet real, to believe in what cannot be touched. And in the glow of ancient fire, 1 million years ago, imagination flickered to life. If there is one thread that ties together every element of human survival 1 million years ago, it is cooperation. Fire, tools, hunting, gathering, migration. None of these could be sustained by a single individual. Alone, a human was fragile, vulnerable to hunger, predators, and the elements. But together, bound by trust and shared purpose, humans became something greater. Cooperation was not optional, it was the very fabric of existence. Picture a hunt. A lone hunter could throw a stone or chase an animal for a short distance, but success was uncertain and dangerous. Together, a group could encircle prey, drive it toward an ambush, or chase it until exhaustion brought it down. The risk was spread across many, the reward was shared by all. Gathering, too, was strengthened by cooperation. One pair might dig for roots, while others climbed trees for fruit or searched riverbeds for shellfish. Children watched and imitated, learning which plants were safe and which were deadly. When the group returned to camp, the foods were pooled, creating a varied meal that no single forager could have gathered alone. Sharing was central to this cooperation. A hunter who kept a kill to himself might eat well for a day, but he would be resented, mistrusted, perhaps abandoned. A hunter who shared earned loyalty, and loyalty meant survival, for the day would come when his own hunt failed, and the group's generosity kept him alive. Reciprocity, giving when one could, receiving when one must, became the unspoken contract of early humanity. Even child-rearing was shared. A mother cared for her infant, but others helped too, older siblings carrying, grandmothers feeding, fathers protecting. In this way, children were not raised by individuals but by communities. This cooperative care increased survival, ensuring that knowledge and genes alike carried forward into the future. Cooperation was also defense. When predators prowled the edges of the camp, the group stood together, shouting, throwing stones, brandishing fire. A lion might seize the weakest alone, but a united band became formidable, even against beasts far stronger. This strength in numbers allowed humans to hold ground in landscapes ruled by larger, fiercer creatures. But cooperation was more than practicality. It was emotional. Bonds of trust, care, and affection wove the group into a whole. Compassion for the injured, grief for the dead, joy in birth, these emotions bound people together beyond necessity. They created a sense of belonging, a recognition that the survival of one was tied to the survival of all. It was this cooperation that set humans apart from many other animals. Wolves hunted in packs, ants labored in colonies, but human cooperation was flexible, adaptive, rooted in imagination and memory. Humans could plan hunts, recall past successes, and adapt strategies to new conditions. They could care not only for the healthy but for the weak and injured. They could forgive, reconcile, and continue living together after conflict. In a sense, cooperation was humanity's greatest invention. Fire warmed the body, tools cut the meat, but cooperation kept the spark of humanity alive when all else threatened to extinguish it. It allowed groups to endure famine, to brave predators, to move across new lands. It allowed knowledge to be passed on, carried like fire from one generation to the next. Even today, in our vast societies of millions, the echo remains. Our need for connection, our instinct to share stories, our bonds of family and friendship, all are rooted in that ancient truth. We are not creatures made to stand alone. We are made to survive together. And so, 1 million years ago, it was not the strongest who endured, nor the fastest, nor even the cleverest alone. It was those who cooperated, who trusted, who shared. In their unity lay the secret to survival, and in that unity lay the seed of humanity's future. 1 million years ago, humanity was not yet what we know today. Homo erectus walked the plains of Africa and Asia. Homo heidelbergensis braved the colder edges of Europe. Their bodies were strong, their brains larger than those of earlier ancestors, their tools more refined, their lives more complex. Yet they were still in transition, stepping stones on the long path toward modern humans. These species laid the groundwork. Their use of fire gave warmth, safety, and nourishment. Their tools shaped wood, cut flesh, and cracked bone. Their cooperation wove bonds that sustained communities. Their migrations carried them across continents, expanding the human story into new lands. Piece by piece, they built the foundations of what we now call humanity. But evolution is slow, relentless, shaped by countless generations. In time, Homo heidelbergensis would give rise to both the Neanderthals of Europe and Western Asia, and the Homo sapiens of Africa, our own species. The Neanderthals would master fire and tools, would create art, would bury their dead, but eventually they would vanish, absorbed or outcompeted. Homo sapiens, with language, imagination, and creativity, would spread across the entire globe. The spark of what was to come was already visible 1 million years ago. Brain size was growing. Social bonds were deepening. The first whispers of imagination, ritual, and belief stirred around firelit gatherings. The human body itself was changing, becoming leaner, stronger for distance, more adapted to endurance. The traits that would define us, adaptability, curiosity, cooperation, were already present, already tested against the harsh world. It is tempting to draw a sharp line between them and us. But the truth is more fluid. We are not separate from Homo erectus or Homo heidelbergensis. We are their continuation. Their struggles, their adaptations, their choices carried forward into our bones, our minds, our genes. When you walk long distances, when you share food, when you feel warmth in the glow of fire, you are echoing their lives. Toward the dawn of modern humans, the world was still uncertain. Climate continued to shift. Predators still prowled. Scarcity and danger remained constant. But humanity had something stronger than any storm, any fang, any drought: resilience. That resilience would carry our ancestors forward through the millennia, until at last, Homo sapiens stepped fully into the world. 1 million years ago, humanity was fragile. Small bands scattered across continents, vulnerable to predators, storms, and hunger. Extinction loomed close again and again. And yet, through fire, through tools, through cooperation, and through imagination, they endured. They were not conquerors of their world, but students of it. They learned from rivers, from plains, from storms and stars. They bent, adapted, shifted, and survived. Their lives were short, their struggles immense. Yet they carried forward something priceless: the thread of humanity itself. From those scattered bands came us. Every person alive today carries within them the legacy of those who survived when survival seemed impossible. Their endurance is written into our DNA. Their lessons echo in our instincts. Their struggles gave birth to our triumphs. As we look back across the gulf of 1 million years, let us remember them not as shadows of ourselves, but as the foundation of who we are. For it was their firelight that first pushed back the dark. It was their tools that first shaped the land. It was their bonds that kept the flame alive. And it was their resilience, above all, that carried humanity forward. We live in cities now, with comforts and abundance they could never have imagined. But deep within us lies the memory of their world. The crackle of fire in the night, the long journey across the horizon, the shared meal after hunger, the circle of family against the storm. We are here because they endured. And in that endurance lies the true story of how humans survived 1 million years ago.